So as you heard, I lead a Center for Social Innovation and IMD, and part of what we do with Patrick Reichhardt here, he's a research fellow at the center, is we work on humanitarian finance and working a little bit on building competencies in this sector so we can understand better and actually lead where we're going. No? So it's very clear that the sector is an existential moment, as we were mentioning, but there are also incredible opportunities and learnings already about interesting transformation. And I think we had a packed morning, so I have the honor to do a little bit of an introduction to set up the scene and try to understand the difference maybe between social enterprises and revenue generating activities and what is the potential. And what it implies if you want to be successful in this transformation, or what do we know from research and from the field. But I think the most interesting part is we have a lot of people actually doing this. So after my initial introduction, we have many different views of people that lead women-led organizations or refugee-led organizations or investors in fragile settings to really see. So I know it's a long morning, but I would love to see you the whole time and not to lose you and make this interactive. So we will have time for Q&A with the people online, but also with the people here in the room, because I think most of the learnings will not come only from the presentation or my questions, but really from your questions or things that will really add value to you. So I will try to make it as interactive as possible. I will also be the bad cop with all the speakers that see me here, because I will cut you off after 8, 9, 10 minutes, so we can have really time for Q&A. So and one thing that I hate, I will have to say, I don't have power over my slides, so I will have to say next slide, what I don't usually like, but I have no choice. So can I get my initial slide? Thank you. So I will try to stay away from academic jargon, financial jargon, social entrepreneurship jargon. So I don't know how I'm going to do today. So just if I lose you, please let me know. So as we mentioned, next slide. So I think a pretty important part is that I think there is a misconception when we talk about revenue generating activities, or even the aim or why we need revenue generating activities, that focus only on the reduction of funding these days. Grants have shrunk, demand or needs have doubled, and they keep mounting. So many times looking at revenue generating activities or innovative finance beyond grants, what we call innovative finance is instruments beyond grants, looks like looking for additional money that will fill this gap. And I think it looks like a trick that NGOs need to do in order to survive, rather than what I think it really is. And I didn't know that I had to do this, so this is even animated. So next. I wouldn't have done that. Yes, next. Hey, the next. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. So in reality, what I want to say is that the misconception is this is a trick, but the reality is that this is a whole new way of delivering impact. So if you understand social enterprises, and I don't know why this is not moving, but that's what the slide says. Social enterprises, oops, no, now go back. Oh, I'm not going to be happy. So really social enterprises are a new way of delivering impact. And when you talk about a social enterprise, you need to understand what kind of problems you are solving in order to understand if social enterprises are a good venue or a good type of organization to deliver that impact. Because it comes with a lot of strings attached and with a lot of organizational transformation, not just with money. So it's not just that you will receive revenue from a certain activity, but really you will have to change the whole way that you work. No, so, and in many cases it can turn beneficiaries into clients, into producers, into part of your value chain, to a whole different mindset of how we talk about delivering impact. Next. So I'm giving you here an academic definition of what a social enterprise is that you don't need to know, but the key features next of a social enterprise are actually that you use market-based trading to pursue explicit social mission. So what NGOs and social enterprises could be for-profit or not for-profit. So the legal form have in common is that they're organized around delivering impact. So really, you're not talking about only commercial enterprises. These are market-based institutions or solutions or businesses created to solve a social and environmental problem. And if you talk about humanitarian, this will be directly related to humanitarian issues. So you are talking about part of the impact economy that is not looking only to maximize profits. It's actually going to use that value also to redistribute to the community. So many times I see in the sector a misconception when we talk about revenue generation activities, and you go immediately to a mindset of exploitation. When we talk about the impact economy and social enterprises, they share your mission. Yes, they share the goal of solving a field or a social and environmental program, but through, again, market tools. And they bear the economic risk of those activities. And there's a high rate of failure, if you want, in businesses in general, but in social enterprises in particular. So this is not something that if you go into, it will reduce your risk. It actually will expose you to a different kind of risk. Next. So for me, the art and the key question you need to ask yourself is, are markets really the right tool for you to solve the problem that you're addressing? No, and because there are problems that cannot be addressed through markets, and you will need grants. So are you able, or is this a way to approaching the kind of problem? So rather than starting, okay, I need revenue generation, is start with the problem. What kind of problem you have? And then we think, and we're going to have people that are going to tell you, I see Ravi, I see UNHCR, okay, you have these problems, how we have done this. You can structure the revenue generating around that if you understand very well the problem. Next one. So I want to expand, because I think we talked to Elise that social enterprises can be a very narrow thing. So when we're talking here, we're talking more about revenue generating activities, and NGOs can generate revenue in different ways. So can be an income diversification. And I've seen NGOs, for example, having real estate. I hope, are you okay? Okay, sorry. Just checking if she okay? Okay. There can be different streams, income diversification that can come, I don't know, you can have a thrift shop of selling used clothes if you're Oxfam, or you can even have real estate selling, or you can provide services and consulting. So you have a revenue generating activity, you can sell artisanal things from communities, but it's not your mission. So these are side revenue generation activities that are not around the purpose or around the mission or the impact that your organization wants to have. Then you can have other type of revenue generating activities that are more related to your programs. So I don't know, if you have a water project, a small fee that can be paid, that can be paid, or if you have clinics, again, you can introduce user fees, or if you have any market services with SMEs, again, you can have some kind of revenue activities, but it's really tied to some of your programs and can be cross-subsidizing or using that money to pay for other things too. And last but not least, you have what I would call fully embedded social enterprises. No, so you are an NGO that is becoming a social enterprise, or you are a refugee-led company, or you are a women-led company in local markets that trades, that produces goods and services, and that is your revenue generating activity. So really, there's no difference between the revenue generating activity and your business model and the impact you want to have. So none of this is better than the other. These are all different tools that you can choose from. And some might not be, not every NGO can be a social enterprise. And you may need revenue generating activities. So this is part of the decisions that you will have to make or understand, but know that they're not the same thing. So when somebody talks about a social enterprise or revenue generating activities, it's not always the same thing. So next one. So just to go a little on that, I'll try to go a little faster, is what problems can be addressed effectively when we engage markets. I told you not all the problems can be addressed. So next. And for me, this is the key piece. Why we didn't have more private capital, or we don't have more private capital in fragile settings? Because markets don't work, or markets fail. Economists call it their market failures. So it's not that investors are mean. If you want, you can say that. But in reality, the private sector doesn't work because there are fairly predictable ways that the market fails. And I think this is the interesting piece. There are certain things that we see that keep money or private money away. So the interesting part of innovative finance is you can design instruments to try to mitigate those issues. So you have to be very intentional to that. So how? And I think this is why we have been progressing, and you're probably going to see. So 3 key things how the private sector or impact investors or investors in general think about it is again, as I was saying, or no, there are a couple of things. So 3 things in order that you get to pull it off, and I will structure what it comes into these 3 things. Is first, again, you need a market problem, and we're going to see what a market problem is and what are the market failures. So market failures may make some problems where there is need. Refugees may need energy, may need water, they need income, but why private sector does not want to invest? They might be perceived risk, they may not understand the reality, but there also might be real risks and interpretations. Another is you need entrepreneurial capabilities. And I will go fast on this one, but when you go and become a social enterprise or start with revenue generating activities, you really need another set of tools that is not the habitual tool that NGOs have. So you need to build competencies, or you need to hire competencies, or you need to partner with those competencies. So you need to do things in a different way. And last but not least, you need the right capital. You need patient capital, you need layering, you need the right other side in order to get the revenue. Not every capital serves the same purpose. So depending where you are, if you're initial stages or scaling stages, you're going to need to partner, you're going to need to talk to different types of investors. And you're going to see a few today. Next. So for me, why market fails, and just think about this, I will not dwell too long, but first, in fragile settings, there might not be ability to pay, willingness to pay, or traditional ways of paying. No, so for example, if you think about insurance in fragile settings, usually without different schemes, they have very low uptake. People underappreciate the risk and sometimes are not willing to pay even small fee for insurance, even when insurance exists and they have not been very successful. So how do you create maybe cash transfer, savings? So there are different ways of dealing with that. Or people really might not be able to pay. Fees might be too expensive and you don't want to get your beneficiaries paying for the service. You may want somebody else to be paying for that. This is where it grants. So is there willingness or ability to pay is the first piece that you need to understand if you want to do a revenue generating activity. If your answer is no, there's no willingness and no ability to pay, maybe you need grants. But there might be a second question. Okay, maybe people cannot pay or are not willing to pay. Can somebody else pay? Would somebody be interested on paying for the impact that I can have? And this is the pay for success or pay for outcomes, or may the government want to pay for this, or a philanthropist pay for this, or a foundation pay? Is somebody else? Can we, what economists call monetize impact? Can we carbon credits if you reduce emissions? Is there a market? Is there somebody that might be willing to pay? So this is a very important question. If we see no ability or willingness to pay, can we design a repayment mechanism? And I think Ravi will talk also how can we protect that capital if we have it so it takes us a longer mileage? The second one, and this is a big one, is risk. Many of you may think that the perception of risk is exaggerated, that private investors don't know, but fragile settings are risky. So they're not only risky because of the perception, but the really conflict, instability, political risk, exchange rate risk, but also data risk. We may not have a track record, the information, the data. We may not have the coordination necessary or the infrastructure to arrive to these places. So we don't need to underestimate risk and blow it away. We really need to price it, what they call it, price it, or we really need to mitigate it. An investor will try to price risk. What pricing risk means is what kind of return I need to recover my money in this risky environment. If it looks too big and my return is too small, I will never be there. And this is why it happens. But again, we can have instruments that can work on these issues, but you will have to build the market. And the last, but not least, is social returns spillover more than spill out. What is the idea? Private companies, when they get the return, the founder gets the return, the revenue, the profit, and can own it. When you have impact or you have a clinic and better livelihoods and you have prosthetics and better life or water for a community, the return, the impact, it doesn't go only to the community. It goes beyond that. And it's very hard also to quantify that. So this positive effect, if nobody owns it, the private sector, is more costly than the returns that come. So again, but this can open doors to mitigate. So these are three typical things of why fragile settings are complex that you will have to address in order to design the appropriate instruments later on. Next one. So on the capability side, and I see a few of my DeFi community here, driving innovative finance community, bringing capabilities. No, so we need to start to understand each other so we can start using more jargon. But the private sector needs to understand how the impact sector or how the NGO sector too. So when you start this journey, you and I see Juan there too. You will need to build those competencies, and some you will need in house because they'll become core of what you need to do. But others you maybe don't need in hand, and you can build through partnerships. You probably don't need to build the structuring of financial instrument that is very complex. That you will need a specialist or a consultant. So sometimes you can hire, some things you can partner, but quite a few you need to build in-house that were different than in the past. And this is creating also a lot of movement in the sector right now of hiring and firing and understanding what kind of capabilities you are going to need and as an individual and as a sector. Next. Last, again, but not least, is the patient capital. And I will not talk a lot about this because we're going to have speakers that are going to talk about this. But it's very different if you're at the initial stages when you need to do proof of concept. Very hard to get money for pilots, for working capital, for feasibility studies. For some of those things, you will need grants. So one of the first mistakes is really thinking that private capital will really jump in with large amounts of money here. You can ask for concessional capital for some of these things on your structures, but that's the second mistake these sectors that they call now everything concessional capital. So it's kind of a crutch for not using grants, and now everything is concessional. It's the same logic. So think that in the initial stages it's going to be hard, and you need to build kind of a path to self-sustainability if you want that concessional capital. Then you will have market validation phase, and later you will have the scaling piece. The more you get to the scaling piece and you have proof of concept and you have track record and you have data, the more you can access different types of private capital. Depending where you are going to need to layer different type of instruments, different type of partners, development financial institutions, impact investors, insurance companies, philanthropists. So how you play with this, and again, I will not deep dive into this. Next one, I'm leaving you with a I think I have a table that I will not go into of different ways that this alternative. Next one, yep. So again, I'm not going to the different alternatives also depending on the stage and depending of what you need to build. And we will share these slides, don't worry, but that can use different kind of designing instruments in order to mitigate and in order to work depending on the stage. So I think hopefully my last slide. Yes. So my last slide, and I think what it is today invitation is not how NGOs can replace grants or become revenue generators. And so take out, I hope you scratch that out next from your head. But the next is really what problems could we finally solve or address, even if it's not solved, if we design markets to work for vulnerable communities. So that for me is the key question today. Can we build an impact economy? Can we build markets that actually respond to the needs to vulnerable communities? And the answer will be no. And in a lot of the speakers we're going to have today will be yes. So when those instruments are very powerful, this is the invitation to have this discussion on how we do this in practice, and we have a great set of people actually doing this. So this is what's coming now. So let me invite first, I think Nicolas Bras. He's the only we have a panel of 3 people, Nicolas Bras, Paul Kitima, and Mustafa Alio. Paul and Mustafa, thank you, are online. And Nicolas will join me here. So we will start with Paul and Mustafa, just in case you don't know, you're there. I'm letting you know now. Welcome. So let me read you very briefly their bios so you can place them. So Paul Kitima is the CEO of Bondeco, a refugee livelihood center and co-lead of the multi-stakeholder pledge on localization, bringing over 13 years of humanitarian leadership and his own lived experience of displacement. And he's from Uganda, works on a village saving program and loans, and he also runs a very interesting social enterprise and a bakery that he will explain. After that, we will have Mustafa, who's the co-managing director or RCIT and pioneer of refugee participation in global policymaking, recognized with Canada's Meritorious Service Medal for his work connecting refugees to economic opportunities. And he will talk precisely of what it takes to invest in refugees and running also a social enterprise. And Nicolas Bras, or Bras, I don't know how you pronounce Bras, chief of the Global Compact on Refugees section at UNHCR with nearly 2 decades of field and headquarter experience spanning Africa, Asia, Pacific, Latin America, and Europe. And he actually will talk a little bit more on the macro side from the learnings on what it takes to build self-reliance in local fragile settings, and also how you build ecosystems around it so these revenue generating activities are successful. So without more introduction, I think you're in. So again, I will give 10 minutes, and after the 10 minutes for each speaker, I will have to cut you off, Paul or Mustafa. So I don't know if you can see me. I can do like this when we have 1 minute, but the floor is yours.
Sorry, I'm Vanina. Paul is not yet online.
Oh, okay. So we start with Mustafa.
Yeah. I hope Mustafa is there. Just a second.
Or we start with Nicolas. You tell me and I'll start.
So Mustafa, if you're online, can we start with you?
So if you can stop sharing so we can see him bigger. We can pin him.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
There we are. Yes. Thank you, Mustafa.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. the conversation on social enterprise. How do I start? I'm just trying to collaborate my thoughts in terms of putting those kind of points. I think I just want to note that I want to take on this, or my take on this has been always with laser focus on refugee-led organization, in particular, and also from my own experience of building and co-creating several refugee-led organization with the concept. But I think in the last few years that we have the conversations on local and refugee and also women-led organization is no longer asking how to grow, and especially when trying to diversify revenue, it wasn't about the growing. I think it's kind of more about like how to survive. Traditional humanitarian funding is shrinking, as everyone knows, more restricted and often too short term to build institutions. And again, especially with the focus on refugee, women-led and local organization. So social enterprise, or ways of thinking a little bit differently out of the box and including social enterprise, has been are becoming more attractive. I think at one point, not because NGOs or those local organizations want to become a business, but again, the idea of survival mode, but potentially, I mean, as we say, with every a challenge, opportunity comes, and maybe that's an opportunity of setting this kind of system for to be a little bit more resilience over time, especially when those refugee and led organizations. So again, but it is important to note that social enterprises social enterprise is not a replacement for humanitarian funding. It is one pathway, institutional survival, autonomy, and resilience. If it comes to a point where some of those organizations get to a level they could replace majority of the humanitarian funding, that's great. But we know for a fact that this is not going to happen when we talk about the system in general. So we need to double down on the idea that humanitarian funding continue to be a very important conversation to have and keep pushing for. I think for local and refugee-led organizations, the issue is not lack of ideas, is always basically the idea. Like, I think the issue has and continue to be is kind of the capacity, the understanding of the market, the understanding on how to build a business and what business to go for, and I think access also to resources of investments early on, or capital to invest, or basically the willing to risk in general. So I think some of the examples I wanted to do, and that has been playing in different settings. The idea, again, as a like NGOs or local organizations getting into the social enterprises, obviously it's not new. We have seen similar examples of something like that for like the 1% for Planet Foundation, where basically it goes to several businesses. It has about like 4,000 plus businesses, and then they try kind of to have them to commit at least 1% of their revenue sales, yearly sales revenue to environmental and NGOs in general. There's the Upside Down Foundation that also try to help some early stages startup to commit like a percentage of their exit strategy to go to NGOs and INGOs. There's the despite all the scandals and maybe all the issues that happened, maybe some of you would know, with the We Charity in Canada, but it's still like at one point they had several social enterprises like Me to We Travel and others, where they committed those social enterprise to provide at least 50% of their revenues to the charity. But then in some years they claimed at this point that about like more than 90% of those revenues went to the charity. So the idea of Mate 51 is a great example of UNHCR, which is, again, it's kind of a more of many social enterprises that and mainly women, I think, led, if I'm not mistaken, is supporting the UNHCR as a one avenue of also funding or revenue. So this is how many of those ideas, and that's how when I was creating Jumpstart, and this is an organization today growing to be in different countries, this has always been on my mind, that the funding and revenue will always be an issue, and how can we think a little bit differently of that? And we have, obviously, initially we wanted building the organization. That wasn't an easy, again, building an organization from scratch and to get to a level. I mean, today Jumpstart is close to 50 employees working in 4 countries, but when we were building the organization, it was, it was only me and then a few volunteers. So while this has been an idea, but we never had the chances of thinking of this or basically being able to do it. But then when we got to a level where I think that started to happen maybe kind of 3 years ago, where it was like, okay, now we can take a bit of our overhead. And even though that continued to be a risk, so we were able to put on the side some of our overhead and then start thinking of partnering with startups and learning and trying with this, where we would go and then try to pick on some startups led by refugees and say, okay, we're going to come like an investor and we're going to own a percentage of your company. Or in some cases, we made deals with some of the e-commerce or businesses that we give them a startup fund. And then we say, okay, we need those startup funds to be returned like 2x's or 3x's within 5 years. Obviously, none of those agreements when we do those companies. So if they get an option, that is the case. Jumpstart in the last 3 years have invested, I think, in close about 8 businesses between startups and others, and we have invested, I think, close to $250,000 in those businesses. The tricky side is, A, this is a long-term thing. B, as you know, maybe some of you would know, that 8 out of 10 startups fail. And in some cases, even 9 out of 10 startups fail. So while those 8 startups that we invested close to basically 250, I think it's also worth noting that 100 out of that 250 came just from a donor who was very open to say, is like, okay, here is money that you just give it to people based on this idea. We haven't seen yet that kind of, let's say, kind of a return from that. We've been able to recoup close to $25,000 to $30,000. But then again, this is a long-term journey. Like we talk about 5 to 10 years, and also kind of learning. But we continue to struggle in terms of like, okay, so then who is the team that's going to dedicate this? And I think the idea of funders to even be open to the point of basically organizations getting money and then becoming an investor, this also needs a long time information, or let's say kind of a more of awareness among funders and philanthropy, like, what would that look like? And this conversation is even harder when there is a shrink in funding at this point, and then most of the funding are going to life-saving activities and just going to go to the most vulnerable, then that's what happens. So all of a sudden right now to go and then tell those people, this is something that we need. I think it is tricky, and then we continue to learn on this. I think the last point I just want to mention, what we've seen some of the best return is that where Jumpstart negotiated higher interest rate accounts with some banks that we have. So we try to go to funders, and when funders goes, here is a 2 years. So not all funders, they would advance 2 years or 3 years. That when some funders advance to 2 years or more in terms of kind of resources, then we would have the ability to, I see you talking, but I can't hear you. 1 minute. Okay. Okay, cool, good. But that's kind of where we've seen sometimes kind of some of the best way of diversing resources is that those kind of negotiations with banks, but at the same time negotiation with funders in terms of kind of advancing fund in advance, or basically giving those resources in advance and allocations. I think it would help a bit. What I'm going to end with on that point, again, that local refugee organization do not want permission to become more innovative. I think it's just they have this idea and they have this innovation. They want ecosystem that stop pushing them from trying. I think just kind of trying and has always been the hardest things, and trying to convince an ecosystem to do that, it's even harder. Social enterprise will not fit every NGO, but in some, for some, it can be serious path toward resilience and reduce dependency. In a fragile setting, sustainability is not a luxury. For many local actors, it is a difference between institutional life or institutional death. And I hope the community and the donor community and also the general community, the global community, can be a little bit more receptive to those out-of-the-box, innovative, a little bit more of a risk of NGOs and local organizations can take. I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, for the great presentation, the general view, and also your experience with Jumpstart. And I want to point out, while we have Paul getting ready, Paul there, right? So I love that you pointed out that precisely the solutions to innovation comes from refugee-led organizations. How do we build the ecosystem around when the partnerships, the bank, the system for sustainability, you know? And I think we'll have a lot more, but hopefully how to thrive rather than only survive and all the challenges. And I heard you, and we can talk about that, about team, about execution, about the cost of the overheads, etc. And so I think we'll talk a lot more about that. So Paul, the floor is yours now.
Yeah, thank you. Let me try to share my screen.
Sorry, I will tell you when there's 1 minute left.
Just trying to share my screen.
But not slides. I think we can see your computer.
Sorry, the computer. Can you see the screen? I try to increase.
Not the slides. No, we see your. Yeah. No, we see your folder that says Bondeco Financial Inclusion, but not the slides.
Try again.
Paul, do you want me to try on my side here, if it's easier?
Yeah. Okay. I've shared with Elise email. I think it's. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, are we all seeing the screen?
Not anymore. Elise is gone now.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Paul, it's on the view only on my side, so I'm not sure I can run the actual thing, but you can see a bit though, at least. I think if we can do it this way, it's okay. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. Yeah. So, first of all, I wanted to say that Bondeco has been able to implement financial inclusion in Uganda, Kampala, thanks to the Refugee Act of 2006 and the regulations of 2010 that has given refugees so many rights they are sharing with the nationals, including the financial inclusion. So that's how we've been able to implement. I'm going to go straight to the slide, second slide, please. Yeah, about the financial inclusion. So we have some highlights. We have the VSLAs, the village of those are the village for savings and loan associations, which are self-managed. So we implemented so far 37 VSLAs, which has 1,110 members. So, and each of these person has a family, and the average of families here in Uganda for the refugees and in Africa in general is about 5 people per family. So if you do the math, you'll see the impact of the VSLAs, the people who are in those VSLAs. 70% are refugees and 30% host community, because we are in a community, Uganda, which is a host community, and our approach is similar to that of UNHCR, which is the 70-30%, 70% of refugees and 30%, to create that harmony of in the community between the host and the refugees. Then the gender, in terms of gender, we have 804 females and 306 males. And then they are doing different businesses. Some of those groups are doing really well. They have retail shops, tailoring, baking, craft, restaurants. So, and they are managing well to save quite a lot, because if you see the figures we have put here, it's equivalent to almost around $80,000 of savings at the end of the year. But we have the challenge on that way is that we have the registration process, because what we are trying to do is to help them to register as with CBOs, community-based organizations, so that they can access other opportunities, because at the end, we are linking them with the financial institutions that are operating here in Uganda, whereby they can access opportunities like loans and other product the bank, those financial institutions might have. But the challenge is that they need to be registered as a CBO at least. And then we have some of the challenges have been about the religious concern in some communities, and then if insufficient capital, because we didn't give the VSLAs, we facilitated the creation. We did not give them the seed capitals because we didn't have that. But then moving forward, we continue advocating for those VSLAs, like what we are doing here in terms of the presentation in such event. It's part of the advocacy, because we believe that financial inclusion will be it's really the way forward. But on this, the comment I would say is that we have seen that although Bondeco is doing that, we didn't. Bondeco is not getting anything that would help the organization to sustain itself. So what we are doing, it helps our community, at least the people who are participating in those VSLAs, to go through financial literacy and entrepreneurship training, and then they are able to do go beyond the savings they are doing and to start generating income for themselves. They create small enterprises. But Bondeko as an organization cannot sustain itself with this. So we are in conversation with some of the financial institutions to see how we can create the circles whereby Bondeko can be the one now giving out the loans, because there is a small percentage, very minimum, the financial institutions are asking them to, yes. And then let's go to the other slide, please. So here we have we managed to set up a bakery, and our bakery is able to, the capacity is to produce 24,000 buns monthly, and we empower the women. But here the challenge is that the demand exceeds most of time the production capacity. Not only that, but according to our experience, we have seen that those small social enterprises we create, like a bakery, can be able only to sustain the people who are working there. For instance, our bakery is able only to pay the allowances of the people who are being involved in the activities, and also the women who are coming to buy at a lower price the buns, and they go in the community to resell. Those ones are making profit. But the organization, once again, as Bondeko, it cannot sustain with this unless we have people who are, we have the possibility to invest enough to be able to set up a real bakery which can compete with the nationals who are having the bakeries that are in the standard, certain standard. For instance, at Bondeko, we don't have, our products are not branded. It's a process, it needs some investment. So in conclusion, I would say that financial self-sustainability of RNOs can be possible if we go, it's not only about going into social enterprises, for instance, but how much do we invest in when we do social enterprise? Because if we invest...
Thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off, but I think you made super important points on the revenue generation does not necessarily mean self-sustainability, and for Bondeko, and how you build and empower and you create an ecosystem around it. So social enterprises that are locally led, refugee-led, like the bakery you're mentioning, and women-led, and really scale and thrive. And I think this is a perfect bridge to have Nicholas talking about self-reliant on refugees and how to build the ecosystem from the UNHCR perspective and what you have done and what's your experience. So the same 10 minutes, I will let you know at 9. And then we open the floor. We're 5 or 10 minutes behind, but I think I'm on time. Good.
Thank you very much, Vanina, and thank you for the invitation to UNHCR. I'm here with 2 hats, obviously UNHCR as the refugee agency, but also as you introduced me, as the head of the Global Compact on Refugees section at UNHCR, which acts a bit as a neutral secretariat of the Global Compact on Refugees, which for those of you who may not be familiar with, was affirmed in 2018 and is really about expanding responsibility sharing in favor of refugees and forcibly displaced, with 4 main objectives: easing pressure on host countries and host communities, enhancing refugee self-reliance, expanding third country solutions, but also working towards solutions in countries of origin. And I'll start with the end to make sure that I get the key message here before you cut me, which is really about what you said, actually, that social enterprise does not replace grants. And actually, it should also, that's a call for those of you in the room who are representing the donor community. Don't also think that you could invest into social enterprising and then at the same time reducing humanitarian funding. So that's a call we will be making continuously, but it's very important to stress that point. And I think the context which you've all discussed over the past days in terms of the humanitarian financing landscape, the funding crunch is a reality, and there is a real. We're going to go back what we used to the context we used to work in. Let's be realistic. So it's really about how do we go from there, how what kind of smart approaches, realistic and implementable approaches we can pursue. And I think really the key point here is there's no business as usual anymore. And this is where localization, local actors, refugee-led organizations, women-led organizations are so critical. And I'm very glad I'm coming after Mustafa and Paul, whom I had also the privilege to meet in other fora. They played a key role in implementing also the spirit of the Global Compact on Refugees, which is really calling for whole of society approaches. And so from the Global Compact on Refugees, why social enterprise is so important? Because it really speaks to three main points. It's about self-reliance, as you mentioned, and it's really about the social impact. So both UNHCR and the Global Compact on Refugees communities really approach it through that angle. What kind of deliverable, what kind of objectives you can deliver from a social impact perspective. So again, it's not just about making money, it's really about the end game. And from UNHCR's perspective, it's really about finding solutions, durable solutions to refugee situations. And at the time when we are talking increasingly about sustainable responses, that won't happen unless you have sustainable local actors. And that is why it was so important to find ways of, and I think Mustafa, you said it when you talked about survival, finding ways of keeping those actors afloat. Because at the same time, the reality is also that we are increasingly competing with each other. For those of you who attended the event yesterday on localization, we heard also some local actors stressing how competition to grant is increasing. So we have to be, that's the reality. It's kind of a business also a reality, but we have to be smart also how we can rally forces and really work together on that. The other aspect of social enterprise from a UNHCR perspective and really enhancing refugee self-reliance, it's really about increasing job skills, but also market integration. And that really speaks to the second objective of the Global Compact, which I explained earlier. The other part that is really embedded into the Global Compact, it's about, again, localization and how social enterprise, in the end, really strengthen local NGOs, local refugee organizations. And it does diversify the nature of the income. And that's really something that, I should have actually studied with that, is social enterprise a good model to follow and invest and support? Short answer from our standing point is, of course, yes. And the last but not the least element where it really speaks to the objective and the spirit of the compact, and I think you heard from previous speakers, it's really about meaningful refugee participation. And this is something that we've made quite good advances with in terms of the level of participation in a number of high-level policy fora. I'll speak in a minute about the Global Refugee Forum and the meeting we held we convened in December on the progress review of the Global Refugee Forum. So it's not just mere consultation, it's really concrete participation, but we're not there yet. And it's really about how those actors, those refugee experts can further contribute to policy making, influence, so to speak. And this is where actually social enterprise actually support meaningful refugee participation, because they are very often led, as far as UNHCR is concerned, and the work we do, led by refugees. So a couple of, just to also go back to the macro level in terms of what we've heard in December at the Global Refugee Forum Progress Review, which was a stock-taking moment since the last Global Refugee Forum, which took place in 2023, which looked at how pledges made by a number of actors under the Global Compact were implemented, what impact it has had, but also that was the moment for us to chart the way forward in terms of guiding us and preparing the next Global Refugee Forum in 2027. As far as this topic is concerned, and I'll look at my notes here to make sure I said that right, there was a number of recommendations and specific calls. So first of all, scaling up the economic inclusion mega pledge, which is perhaps the largest mega pledge that we have under the Global Refugee Forum. It speaks to economic inclusion and social protection. It has over 80 stakeholders and over 300 commitments. This is go back to the connection point. And I think, Mustafa, you used that word. You talked about how we can facilitate, connect actors with each other. That's exactly what the Global Refugee Forum also is all about. And I know speakers in next parts will speak to that. It also called for expanding innovative and blending financing models. And we have, I think, we'll have good examples in the next segments. It called for more direct support to refugee-led organizations. And it calls for having meaningful participation more embedded in program design. And I think this is where social enterprise is a nice intersection between these different priorities. So now I'm going to put back my UNHCR hat and explain a little bit what we are trying to do to really lift some of the barriers, because that's actually, and we've heard Paul and Mustafa explaining that a little bit, you know, what we see, and since we work with a lot of refugee-led organizations, very often, some of the difficulties are administrative. In some countries, it would take 2 years to register an NGO, a refugee-led organization, while it takes 2 hours to register a business. But then, of course, the next question. For refugee to actually start a business, they need to have the right to work, access to labor. So it all comes together, and this is where policy and legal framework are so important. So we're working also with a number of private sector actors to map, with the LA paper, not to name them, to really map all the barriers overall globally, and that will also help us engage our advocacy efforts with many of you in this room. There's one good element. I think some colleagues in the room, I think from the UN Women will speak later on some of those pool fund and innovative financing system. We have a refugee-led innovation fund, which is really about helping refugee-led organizations kickstart some activities, really speaking to social enterprise approach. And that's not much money, but it's seed funding that can help start and initiate some activities that really have a strong social impact. So perhaps I have 1 minute, 30 seconds left. So I really want to stress that the Global Compact on Refugees and the pitching framework are enabling to really advance social enterprise. And what perhaps on Monday we'll have a briefing where we'll present the recommendations and the outcome document of the Global Refugee Forum Progress Review held in December. What clearly is coming out of that is that we now need to be perhaps even more narrow and more strategic, even clearer on the way we pledge. And I think that's something I would really look forward to your continued engagement or new engagement for many of you in the room or online to help us move that needle forward. Because we have provided this toolkit where we connect host countries with donors, really in line with the HDP, Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus spirit. But now I think it's time to really have even more concrete and implementable pledges. And that's why UNHCR, we have our continued commitment. Our new commissioner really stated it very clearly. And we're actually technically a refugee-led entity now, or former refugee-led entity. So we're really moving into a direction that is made it very clear, but also reducing the reliance on humanitarian aid. And for this to happen, it's through this type of mechanism. So I'll stop here and I'm looking forward to the Q&A where I will hopefully share more details. Thank you.
For those of you that were not maybe in the first part of the session, just a super quick recap and an introduction to this second part, an amazing panel that I get to moderate now, that work on financial inclusion, but at work on empowering local communities. And I think it was Uganda and Elise, Paul was from, let's see, Uganda and? It was global. He was in Canada, but it was more global, exactly. Lebanon, Syria. So that we're actually working with refugee-led organizations on how to empower and provide goods and services, if you want, or needs in fragile settings. Thinking about impact first, but also thinking about their own self-sustainability and how challenging that can be, from regulatory challenges to financial challenges to, again, enterprise building challenges. And also, but the great opportunities and the great results of really owning the solutions that are adapted to the local environment. And we saw also from UNHCR different initiatives to build the ecosystem so these things become easier. At a time, and I think it was an interesting comment that I probably used at the recouping, if we're all competing for the same grants and same resources, there is really two speakers right now that represent, I would say, the two sides of the story. I'm an economist, so I'm big on demand and supply, but I'm not going to say that. So let's call it the two sides. We have Gloria Shoma from TT Foundation, and let me give you a little bit of her bio. She's the executive director of TT Foundation in South Sudan and a leading voice for localization, co-chairing the ASCC localization task for while running multi-sector humanitarian programs across 6 states. We've shared a few panels together, and I know you're in for a treat, and the amazing and impactful work that Gloria and the people in her community do. And she will talk precisely of what are the challenges and opportunities of these women-led organizations' revenue-generating activities. And we have also Maria Krish, it's a program coordinator and UN Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. So we'll have the investment side of the story. And she has actually a 70 million grant making portfolio that supports women-led organizations and refugee-led organizations. So we are going to start looking a little bit of what it takes, or what do you look for when you want to empower local organizations. So without talking too much, again, 10 minutes for each of you. I will try not to interrupt you, but if I need to, I'll tell you when 1 minute is left. So we'll start with Gloria.
Thank you so much, Vanina. Good morning to all of you. Maybe just to begin the conversation off, the aspect or the concept of social enterprising or revenue generating activities for women-led organizations is not really a new thing. I think we within the humanitarian architecture want to always, think we are being innovative. However, I want to debunk that in most cases, these things have been happening, but then we previously didn't want to talk about it. But when the situation began shifting with all the aid cuts that we're seeing, and then we want to presume that, it's a new way of working. No, it's not. So maybe just to speak on the South Sudan context, we know that so many women-led organizations for the longest time have been the least funded, right? And yet they have funding from bilaterals or even from the INGOs or the UN sector, but they are still pushing on and working within their communities. And this is where the income generating activities begin to become crucial or critical. And so for the context of South Sudan in particular, I want to maybe give an example of what we have been doing and how we've been gathering also some of this information at a context level. So the TT Foundation leads a network of about 150 women-led local organizations in South Sudan within a pool. And so everyone comes in with their different ways of working and how they are able to survive or navigate through funding tsunamis for the longest time. And this is where we get real live stories on how they've been able to survive themselves. The Foundation in particular, I would say that our journey began in 2017, when of course, as any other organization, we didn't have sufficient resourcing at the time. And so what was there for us? We started investing in, I would say, skill, the human resource aspect, which is painfully expensive some days because it comes at a cost. And at the time, there was a lot of the realization now within the climate space in South Sudan, where floods was a great deal. But then the climate question was really a hot topic. But then how were we going to reposition ourselves, use that for social good, became the big question. As an NGO, of course, there are guidelines legally that, right? So parameters of you being a nonprofit and now trying to look at aspects that will generate resourcing, on the other hand, becomes that for the first time we used that skill in terms of pioneering the fuel efficiency stoves and the business in South Sudan in 2019, but beyond that also the solar cooking stoves as a solution really for the untapped, I would say, opportunities of the sun. If you've been to Juba, we're talking of over 40 degrees. What we decided to do then was to ensure that through the architecture itself, we could sell this idea in energy, climate conversations, and how we could push the agenda forward. So we had most of our contracts, of course, come from activities from INGOs and UN agencies that will contract us, and then we offer the service at a fee, and that's how we've been able to raise resources really to advance both the work that we do, but at the same time also to ensure that there was I would say a flow of resources for the organization. And in this regard, knowing that we were purely, of course, initially a humanitarian agency, we needed to have a subset of a business wing that would really administer, profit questions, be able to guide that. But the end goal really for us was, again, how do we utilize these resources to be able to advance the work that we do? Because in our setting is that it's so difficult for me sometimes to get an emergency fund if there is an emergency response, right? But because we have this extra resource somewhere, then it's very simple for us trigger that money out and be able to intervene. For example, if you had that in Juba, in South Sudan currently, in an area called Akobo, we're having a situation of aerial bombardments, and a lot of NGOs were evacuated in the last 72 hours since Sunday. And that means no response in those communities. What do? Get back to the funds that we have been generating over the years, and then be able to move in as a first responder, do something around it as we wait for the humanitarian community to feel that they can finally be safe to access the location and intervene, right? So ironical, but that's our lived reality anyway. And so now that's our perspective as TT, and beyond that also we have been able to support other local women-led organizations in ensuring that we support them in terms of developing different business models, depending on, of course, your capacity. And the reason why we agree to not really confining how we support women-led organizations is that we know that at the end of the day, capital is coming from the founders' individual pockets, because there are no investors that would be willing to give seed capital for these women-led organizations to really commence the journey. So they're not very big businesses, but I would say that they come in again to support, given the fragility. I know that there's a question on fragility and investors' interest in terms of wanting to work within such settings. But I think for the South Sudan case, it's quite unique because, again, is able to commence a venture, let's say in health, then it's very easy that it is not just only a social enterprise for them in terms of making extra income, but it also moves a little bit the long way to support with essential services that potentially would either come from NGOs, and remember that NGOs activities are always prioritized. And so if that locality does not have a medical facility, it's okay. you're not able to access. It's coming in also to play in to cover that niche or gap that is that we have challenges, of course, in terms of accessing finance or seed capital, basically, to be able to advance some of these conversations. But the unfortunate or fortunate situation is that the seed capital sometimes that women-led organizations are really looking for is not huge money. We're not talking in millions, right? And sometimes I think it's just the lack of willingness for partners to be able to come in and, inject that money. And I don't see why you fear, because again, in injecting that resource, sometimes you pull yourself off from a long-term burden, knowing that if this organization is doing, let's say, a social enterprising in education or in a health sector, it goes a way long, it provides a longer solution to these communities that are able to access these basic rights. Through many NGOs because of the prioritization problem. The skilling gap or the human resource gap is also another challenge, because the trainings sometimes do take long, and shifting the mindset from business, from humanitarian to commercial is a skill that sometimes the humanitarian community does not have. And then finally, maybe we have also the so if an organization is doing social enterprising.
And I love especially the part of having reflective of what is your source of expertise. What are the learnings that you build from that experience that actually have a market value? No, and I think that kind of reflection we should all have. What is our secret sauce? What is our value? And can this actually generate a revenue? Along with the challenges and opportunities in the terrain. But on the other side, on the investment, fund with special focus on refugee-led and women-led organizations. So if you can tell us a little bit more how you look at the same issues, but from the investor side.
Thanks. And before I start, I wanted to say that I feel very inspired by what you said, Gloria, and how your journey went from being a humanitarian actor to finding a market gap to developing this solar cooking, full efficiency solutions, and then selling that and reinvesting it in humanitarian emergency. I think it's these type of impact journeys that we see a lot across women-led and women's rights organization, and Gloria's organization is a perfect example for that. And that's also exactly what we fund as the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Because as Gloria also said, this is not new. Women's organizations have been working on social enterprises, on economic recovery for a long time. It's only new that we now start. We see real opportunity in a world where traditional humanitarian funding is declining, and demands for local organizations are actually growing, because we see increasing crisis, we see increasing needs to invest in frontline defense, and women are at the front lines, really ensuring that they're reaching the marginalized populations that have the highest needs, such as refugees and women and other minorities. So for many of the women-led organizations we work with, this means increasing.
Can you explain briefly what a pool fund is for those that don't know?
So, So a pool fund is basically a partnership between UN agencies, government and civil society. It's part of the UN family, but it sits in the multi-partner trust fund office to really allow the UN to work across sectors and UN agencies. So it's a different, sorry, I have a bit of a cold. It's a model that really allows to create synergies and maybe UN aid in action as well, and bring the UN family a bit more together in the delivery. And if you're interested in hearing more, I'm here after this event as well. So 3 things in what pooled funds can do, UN pooled funds, but I think it applies more generally to funds and philanthropic organizations as well. So the first is to provide dedicated seed funding to women entrepreneurs. The second is to reduce barriers to access. Gloria mentioned that many women's organizations can't access funding, seed funding. So this is where pooled funds play a role in making it easier to access funding. And then the third one is supporting the sustainability and also the growth for women entrepreneurs. And what I want to do with the rest of my time, and sorry, I'm seeing your, okay. I want to give you some concrete examples on how this can be done. So first, providing dedicated flexible funding. So as a UN, what we do is we actually make it an explicit criteria for seed funding that an organization is a women-led organization, a women's rights organization, and a local grassroots organization. By that, we're already making sure that the funding is actually going to those that are underfunded. So making it an explicit criteria is very important, and that has enabled us to invest in over 1,800 local organizations in 49 countries, with a large proportion of our investment going into economic recovery, including social entrepreneurship. So 400 grants are currently funded in that area. And what's also important is we want to go beyond the usual suspects. So not fund organizations that have been funded by the UN before, philanthropies before, but fund organizations that have never been funded by the UN before. So half of the organizations we fund have never been funded by the UN. And what's also important is that we make sure that organizations are actually those local frontline defenders that you were describing and having that impact. So when we look at applications, we really ensure that the organizations are locally registered and they actually have a track record in working with local communities, no matter if they're informal or formal, or reduce structural barriers for seed funding of social entrepreneurship activities. And as Gloria, why is that? Well, first of all, they can't absorb multi-million grants. Second, they might have language barriers in international funding competitions for social entrepreneurship. And the third is that they might actually lack formal registration that is needed or under-registered for long enough to access that type of seed funding. And what we can do as funders is to make grants smaller, promoting a consortium approach. So an established social enterprise can collaborate with an organization that is not formally registered and might be refugee-led, but having a huge social impact on the ground. And we are piloting, the colleague from you is not in the room anymore, but we are piloting a new partnership with UNHCR to actually fund refugee-led organizations that are not registered this year, including through social entrepreneurship activities. Last point I wanted to make about how we can be better funders for women-led social entrepreneurship activities, and that is it's critical that we need to go beyond just seed funding as well. And how do we do that? Organizations need to build sustainability and ecosystems through institutional support, through technical capacity, but also movement building activities, networking activities, peer learning options. And at HF, we address several ways. We actually invest in core funding. We provide core funding from $2,500 to $30,000. It's small. We invest in small social enterprises to cover operational costs, strengthen governance structures, attract and retain staff. Gloria mentioned how important it is to invest in HR. That really helps the organization not just to survive, but resilience. We also reinvest in successful organizations through targeted call for proposal and multi-year investments. So to really give them the time to establish themselves and also graduate from our funding to then generate their own income. We're creating networks through in-person convenings such as the Global Peace Forum that's coming up in Geneva later this year. We are creating networking opportunities through what we call peer learning grants, because we understand there's so much competition in the system at the moment. And we need to reduce it's about. We are ensuring that organizations can learn from each other. So if an organization is good in fundraising and the other one has a good communications campaign, and the two of them work together. We have an example where the two and the successful communications campaign, and both organizations managed to raise new funds. So there's so much we can do when we actually think in a feminist way and bring organizations together rather than pitch them against each other. And that's what we do as a feminist fund, and that's, I think, what many women-led organizations are also doing, thinking in terms of solidarity and what can be done if women and women-led organizations come together, rather than if we compete against each other. With my last 20 seconds, I just wanted to say this is not new. We need to continue what's working and talk about it more. Women-led organizations are already driving innovative economic solutions in their community. And our is to ensure access to the environment and the networks to succeed.
Thank you so much, Maria. And I think you have heard the other side of a pool fund that also has grants. So you see that grants still matter, especially at the seed level. And I love that you also use a word that you help them graduate. And I think that is the part of what we're trying to see is how you build smooth, create the capacity and support in the process so they can graduate, grow, and create efficiency. I think having both sides and working at scale like a pool fund can do, but by putting different institutions together, you can have impact. Other than the smaller investments that Gloria was mentioning, I think is an interesting way to look at. So the idea now is to open for questions. Please, people, as many of you ask questions too, and people here in the room. I will start one of my own because we haven't talked a lot about technology or data, and that has been one of the other enablers sometimes to document. So I wanted to know if they don't use registration of these women-led enterprises, because we've seen that's a hurdle sometimes. Is there anything else that you use in your due diligence? Is that of record or anything else? Just curiosity, and then I'll get to more questions in the room. Yes. Yeah.
So what do we do with registered organizations? To give you an example from a as you women really disappeared from public space. Never more important is for women-headed households and we keep women economic recurrence. And we work with organizations that have been registered or known as women's rights organizations previously are now not allowed to register anymore because women's organizations are not headed by women, they're not allowed to employ women, women are not allowed to go to the office, but they keep working in their living rooms, they keep working in their communities, they keep working online, and that's how we fund, because we know of their track record and their work, and same for refugee-led organizations.
Good. And on your side, maybe Gloria, how you document your impact if it's not necessarily registration, what else? Or how you bring that to an investor value?
So as an organization that is pulling also resources for continuity of some of this work, what we've done with the funder is that fortunately it's a philanthropic, they're philanthropic funders, so there's a lot of flexibility, and we have allowed mutually in the agreement that let's allow room for both failure and room for improvement, right? It may not work. It is okay. We rebuild from those mistakes and keep going. We have also simplified tools on how we guide them on, the tracking methodology of their different enterprises from the establishment, including even the business plan write-up, right? And we have localized that to an extent of the language question. So we don't use English. If you speak Dinka, if you speak Bari or Arabic, and then we get people that will work with you on that. And that's for us how we have simplified it, because again, it's not about us, it is about ensuring that we're empowering, right? So, so that again, we're not taking a lot of control and charge of that, but they are taking more control and ownership.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think the peer learning in many ways, even from. Elisa, I think you had a question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sell this to them, and have they got a sort of risk appetite for this type of investment? And maybe this is also then a question for Gloria, which is linked. You read in a lot of articles that in order to get to the revenue generating stage, really to start to break even, it's 10 years, right? So again, combining that with the donor narrative, are they in, especially if you're a humanitarian, this not this, will they be patient enough? And sorry, and that's one question. The next question is, in terms of both for you and Gloria too, what type of technical support or mentorship did you need throughout that journey of launching these different enterprises, and to what extent, Amaria, is the plan doing that?
So,
well, in terms of mentorship and what we required majorly was the connectivity to the right institutions, to the right networks, or to the right people. In the context of South Sudan, in as much as we have some level of capacity, some of the facilities or amenities are not in country. So we need to connect either to Uganda or either to Nairobi for some of this technical support. Or sometimes it was about bringing the right individuals to come in country for purposes of course, we can't take everyone out, right? I think there's a difference why we ran to the philanthropic space, again, of the level of patience that they do have and the risk appetite, really, right? And that's why they're still investing. Unlike, I think, the bilaterals, which Maria can talk to way better than myself. And for our grants, majorly are just grants with no attachments. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may add, you were asking, how do we convince our donors? Yes, our main donors are government. We do have some private donors and high net worth individuals investing in the fund as well. We also work with celebrities, so it's a bit of a mix, but the majority of funding still comes from traditional government sources. And why do governments invest in us? I mean, the fund has grown quite rapidly over the past 10 years. It's now at almost $300 million as an investment, just within a 10-year time period, which means donors are interested in actually investing in women's rights, women-led organizations. And what we believe lies behind it is that donors, in the end, governments are accountable to their taxpayers, and they need to show value for money. Investing in local women's rights organizations shows very good value for money because you can see the impact. You can talk about, as a result of this investment, this new enterprise was established that is selling crafts and arts, and these crafts and arts are now being brought to the market and have actually built this community in the refugee camp for them to become independent, and address protection issues. I'm actually talking about a specific example called Agra Jatra from Bangladesh. That really managed through the selling of goods by refugees to reinvest in protection of refugees and services that many women in these communities couldn't access without that external revenue source because they can't leave the camps. So donors see these very clear case studies and they can communicate that to the taxpayer, and that makes it easier to reinvest in funds like ours. And yeah, in terms of the capacity strengthening aspect, so you mentioned, Gloria, that bringing organizations to the right individuals, the right connections. So what we do as a fund also with all of our partners, we really put civil society at the heart of everything we do. So we bring them to the Security Council to brief the Security Council. We bring them to a donor meeting. Actually, later this afternoon, we have a donor meeting with a group of friends of women, peace and security. And our civil society partners will be there to talk about their testimonies. And this is how we make sure that our civil society partners actually have the direct connection. We are not the intermediary. We are the enabler that make sure they have a seat on the table.
Thank you. So I will invite the next panel now. Thank you so much, Marianne. Good. So our last but not least panel, we have Arunima Singh from IMS Foundation Online. I think we will see you in a minute there. She's been with us from the very beginning. So, and I will invite Ravi Yashbek and Wolfgang Gressman to the table. I don't know how to call it, to the panel. Start the conversation. And as I mentioned, this last part, we will continue with examples. And because we're going to have three different kinds of, if you want, the investor side, even though I don't know if you want me to call you investor side, but really the foundation side. Arunima Singh is from the IMS Foundation, and let me give you, she's the head of programs at IMS with experience in scaling impact-driven ventures across the 4 continents. So really, she has experience with more design and the structure of funds to enable some of these things that we heard, how you show the value for money, how you create self-sufficiency, how you build infrastructure, how you take care of this very hard and money that comes into these funds. We have Ravi Yasbek from is an innovative finance specialist with more than 25 years in fragile and conflict-affected settings, known for developing blended finance mechanisms and quite innovative. Bring a problem to Ravi, I think he'll design you a solution, at least from what I've seen. And how to channel investment over local actors and enterprises. And I think I have mentioned that he's near its foundation, just in case I didn't. And Wolfgang, with more than 30 years in strategy and program leadership, currently chairing the multi-donor aid fund for Syria. I know these early stages for the aid fund for Syria, but I think we would like to hear a little more. So we have like 15 minutes for both of you. We could maybe push it a bit more, but I'll be a little also strict on the time. But we start with Ravi. No, we have 15 minutes for them, but 10 minutes. We will start first, sorry, with Arunima Singh. She is online. So, there you are. Now I can see you. Great. And you do have your full 10 minutes. So if you see me doing
Wonderful.
like this, it's because we're 9. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vanina. Hi, everybody. My name is Arunima Singh. And as Vanina mentioned, I had programs for IDNM Stellan Foundation. We're a Swiss family foundation based in Zurich, and we do grant making on humanitarian aid, which is not what I lead, but we also do grant making and entrepreneurship and development, which is what I lead. I do have a background in impact investments, so I'm very happy to be part of this panel to talk about maybe some of the things that we learned when I used to still do investments, and then when we moved on to more INGO space and started doing similar work with the World Food Program. And today I speak with a lot of humility to say how can we as donors and funders really talk about different ways of supporting social enterprises and organizations who are going into this journey. Maybe very briefly, I think there are 3 things that I want to consider when I talk about this topic. Is I would love for us to have an honest conversation of why are we expecting NGOs to move to the social enterprise ecosystem? That is it because there's lack of funding, or is there's actually a market opportunity? Because depending upon the real reason, we will then talk about the impact that we are creating. And I think if there is a funding concern, which 100% there is, we would be talking about different metrics, and we would be talking about what is to talk about income generating activities, which then has much more underlying societal impact, like empowerment, women employment. I think we're talking about different impact, and they are incredible organizations. TT Foundation, one of them, who is also one of our partners that have been doing this work for years. So how do we lean in and support the work which is already happening without being influenced by the new fancy shiny terms of social innovation? We're like, no, these organizations have always been doing this. And how do we create more financial infrastructure to incentivize them, to support them, to meet the people we serve where we are? And I think that's a conversation that we need to have from the donor side, we need to have from the financial institution side, but we also need to see what is the reality of the ecosystems that we're giving grants in. And I think that comes to my second point of saying that I get very concerned when we start using private sector vocabulary for humanitarian aid and development. If there was a market in South Sudan to do investments, we should rely on capitalism and believe that this market would have been exploited. But there isn't a market, and then we are expecting social entrepreneurs to step in and start doing this work. I think Mustafa very pointedly mentioned something earlier in his presentation that when they decided to set up the bakeries, they had to take out some of the overheads to then set up the bakeries. And as donors, as grantors, as sub-grantors, we give to our NGOs, we give project proposals. There is very limited overheads that we are allowing for them to use to be innovative in set up a social enterprise. So I think when we do think about NGOs moving into the startup space or the social enterprise space, let's also offer them the support that are we providing them this funding to innovate, pivot, fail, which is not going to then directly impact their beneficiaries. Because as a startup, we're not expecting these startups to, I don't know, support children, look at maternal health while they are coming up with a new business model. So we dabble in between the intersection of two sectors, and we have to be cognizant of what kind of support is required and who is helping these organizations to transition. What are the business support organizations, the BDO organizations that might help them into becoming a business. Somebody else earlier asked a question on how do we support social enterprises to do market development. By patient capital, 100%, because market development does not work in the project life cycle that we as donors give money. It's not going to happen in a year. As WFP, when we were looking at social entrepreneurs at scale, we like to say that somebody became an overnight success after 10 years. And which is very true because there is no market. There is very little money going into these markets. So we have to rely on more patient capital to support these social enterprises to become well sustainable, but also develop a market while we are at it and to keep it more sustainable. I think within IMS Foundation, one of the things that we've realized is this changing this vocabulary between investments and grants. We're like, it's not an investment. If this was an investment in the pure private sector terms, let's also talk about capital markets. Will there ever be an exit? No. So let's be cautious about what are we offering, what kind of investment terms can we give, and then as somebody rightly said in the previous panel, let's build a value chain that we could support organizations till a certain level. When do we expect banks to come in? When do we expect different financing mechanisms to come in? And how can we play a role in it? Which moves me to my third and the final point is the role of foundations and donors and regranters in this space. I think as a foundation, we really rely on local partners to make a decision on where are the best investments placed, that where do they find in the value chain it would be most catalytical for organizations to receive grants, investments, debt, what would be best fit for the ecosystem that we are in. And I think we have to take as philanthropic capital, we have to take the opportunity to be the risk capital, which would then allow other institutions to pull in. That we would be able to cover the first loss. We would be able to incentivize organizations to come to countries where there's actually not an interest to come in. And how do we develop more equitable markets? And for that, I think we have to, let's talk about unlikely allies, that how do we get on board with different organizations, different teams to come in and support. And I speak really fast, so I'm just looking at my time. I think I've covered most of my points that I wanted for today, Vanina.
Good. So that was very fast, but I think we'll come back to you for the Q&A part of it. And I think you propose very provocative pieces also that we've been talking all this time about what it means to talk about markets in fragile settings. Are we fully importing the logic of the market, or how does impact play a role? And I would love later to discuss, but this exit question, if we talk about grants, we know that grants might be repeatedly, but we're talking sometimes about these investments, or even catalytic or concessional capital. You need to graduate at some time. You need to exit. What is that exit? The exit of the institution. I'm not saying the exit of the entrepreneur with the growth. No, so I think these are pending and very important issues, and I'm happy you brought it. And how you replenish these funds and continue, I think, is also an interesting question. And with that, I will lead you to Rabi, because I think you have some of these issues also in the design of the kind of financial instruments you use.
Thank you. So I work for Neris Foundation, which it's a foundation that very one of the key programmatic area and focus is about supporting frontline organizations and local organizations to amplify their work and invest into their sustainability, especially in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And at the same time, I'm personally a development practitioner who with experience with in fragile and conflict-affected settings, so the nexus, using the terms, and with background in inclusive economic development. In all these terms, the inclusion, the markets, the local economies, as well as embedding development angles into those solutions, and especially sustainability, kind of underpin this approach. How we can leverage, for example, market-based systems, as well as ensuring the inclusion of those kind of solutions, and at the same time, the credibility institutions and frontline actors in such a complex and fragile settings. And within that spirit, I'm going to share two specific examples to make it concrete, and also share some data behind them. So one thing we've been working on is it's a refugee impact bond in Jordan. This is a outcome-based instrument, meaning it's a pre-financed by impact investors, and then repayments are then paid back the investors based on verified long-term outcomes at the level of beneficiaries and communities. What's interesting about this facility, and facility that had just actually concluded after four plus years, so we're really building on experience here and data. What's interesting is that didn't only invest into the delivery of services for refugees and host communities. It's also invested into a network of frontline actors, and these are community-based organizations, society organizations that they were doing amazing work in that specific space, with the objective that actually how you can deliver quality funding to them that's multi-year, that's flexible, that's outcome linked. That's actually also very important is that it's kind of shifted the financing risk away from them as well. And this is a very important point in leveraging innovative finance in that specific space.
Can you explain briefly that? I think for those that may know, outcome funding is obvious, but why the shift in risk? Who's bearing the risk now if it's not the local? The frontline
investors, outcome funders, which are also grant makers, also shared the risks. Basically, the outcome funder or grant makers shifted part of those risks to actually impact investors, and they didn't actually trickle them down to the social enterprises in this case. And that's a very important point. And that's actually, in my opinion, the power of innovative finance when it's rightly structured. And the data was actually quite amazing. And if I allow me also to share a little bit of data on the impact on those actually organizations. And we've seen 131% increase in revenue, annual revenue, by the end of the impact bond. And within that, and this is revenue, cumulative revenue. Within that, about revenue generated from income generating activity from social increased actually by 160% and represented about 20-25% in average for each of those partners. What we also found is actually that a significant increase, about 600% in actually public contracts actually taken by those. And at the same time, we're seeing also kind of a ripple effect, and that's actually it has increased the memberships. It has increased also the in-kind contributions. It has increased also the local resource mobilizations. And on all of these have increased, not declined. We're seeing a lot of correlations happening here. But what you're seeing, what portraying here, it's image going back to your typology earlier, is actually, it's about income diversification, which is creating financial resilience among those institutions, those frontline actors. And I think this is what we're seeing increasing across multiple geographies. We're seeing a lot of actually in the, I think you called it level one or group one, in that specific kind of bracket or segment, there's a significant uptake of those kind of social enterprise activities linked with income diversification. Some of this is also program linked as well. So some of their program services started to actually generate some income as well. But we're seeing also through the correlation that actually this didn't impact their legitimacy. This didn't impact how they are perceived by constituency. And we have data on this also. Actually, the perception of their constituencies improved over time as well, not decline. So this is these are important actually things to actually really study and monitor. That's one aspect. And also just to highlight also, we're seeing also increase in partnerships as well. We're seeing 14 actually partnership per partner have actually increased over time, and 4.3 funding sources have new funding sources have been also added on top of this. So you can see it's a complex picture, but it's important complex picture because all of these actually kind of portray specific picture here. The second one, we also have been embedding revolving financing in the operation, not the operation, but actually in the organizations, within the organizations of these frontline actors across multiple geographies. The majority of them are really in complex and fragile settings. So from northern Mali to Sudan to South Sudan to Jordan to Western Iraq, etc. About only 10% of them are operating directly by us, but the rest are all operating and embedded into actually the frontline organization and owned by them. This is they become their funding, revolving within their institutions. We have about actually 63 of them across those geographies. And what's important about this is that they recycle capital and create kind of a buffer in case of shocks. So what happens to them is actually if there is a shock that is triggered in those complex settings, and they can be actually utilized and recapitalized. They can be depleted. They can be, and in peacetime, in stable time, they continue to revolve and support quite often creating a source of income actually for those organizations to sustain their services. So it's one aspect of also a financial resilience as well that we're embedding with those organizations. The second one is that we have been and also in fragile settings such as Syria, we're operating a blended finance facility, combining grants with impact investments and some first loss or capital as well to support enterprise growth. And also we're in structuring phase also in Sudan and Somalia. So within that bracket of target, we're seeing also that there's a lot, also going back to your typology of social enterprises, there's a lot of uptake among displacement population-led businesses and social businesses, women-led businesses, etc., but also among cooperatives, which classify them under group 3, social cooperatives in this case. So they are not serving only their members, they're serving the broader communities as well. And in some cases, some of these cooperatives became 30 seconds. Okay, all right. And within that, we're trying to bring these 3 elements together. So blended finance with social enterprise development, with revolving financing, to actually create a more without going into too specifics, but we're building into this blended finance facility a built-in de-risking kind of mechanisms, because the revolving fund can operate as a first loss. But just 2 seconds here, and I think it's important that also one of the best practices, that it's important going back to tiering or segmentation, or classifying them by readiness. These are very important because, as you can see, these are very different kind of type of organizations and very different outcomes and very different pathways. And it's important to segment those facilities and the financing windows based on these segments, and segments are very context specific, as you can see earlier, based on readiness, so early stage, emerging, mature, and as well as importantly based on frictions. And these tend to be political and regulatory frictions. And we're seeing that those frictions are very critical. Enterprises, in addition to market-based risks, obviously, we're also, we need to be very careful about overloading the organization. So this is why the tiering is very important. At the same time, mission drift and linking to mission and constituency expectations as well. So, and it's important also to measure this and embedded within the piloting, especially for small early stage, and exclusion drift as well. So risks, and these can be addressed through, we're seeing a lot of freemium model, and I think some of the examples mentioned this, where also do no harm and affordability test, not only willingness to pay as well for some type of and financial and finally fiduciary risks as well as legitimacy risks. And I think legitimacy risks are very critical in this case, and especially when social enterprises get involved in a post-conflict settings in areas that are providing public services, where also you have a government that are also trying to gain legitimacy as well.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I think Wolfram gave a few minutes from his time very generously, but very interesting. And I think you gave very interesting examples for this tiering and how you need to design for the actual problems and context and nuances that you have. And I think you are going to go now to a specific case also, that is the Syria fund, no, if I'm not wrong. Yes, aid fund for Syria. Again, early stages, but you can tell us a little bit on how it's being structured and what it means.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me also for this timely and necessary discussion. As you will figure out in the next minutes, I'm not an expert in innovative financing or social enterprise development, but I am indeed representing a humanitarian multi-donor pool fund. We are not that new. We have been operating for the past 3.5 years, specifically from humanitarian entry point in the changed context last year. I think we are trying to position ourselves as an engine in the middle between humanitarian work on one side and development work on the other. So it is from this perspective as a multi-donor pool fund that we realize the relevance and importance of contributing to increased resilience, diversification of income streams for our local partners. And we are particularly happy to have Rabi and Near East Foundation and ICFA on our side in unpacking how we can actually do this as a multi-donor humanitarian pool fund. Let me start with one note of realism. And we heard this a couple of times before. Social enterprise for us are not a rescue package for NGO sustainability, especially in fragile and conflict-affected sessions. For some organizations, this may work. For others, especially those operating in protection and core humanitarian service delivery, grants remain essential. We also heard this from our colleague from UNHCR earlier today. So the first point is that social enterprise should remain a target pathway, but not become necessarily the sector's next orthodoxy. So the question is not whether social enterprises are relevant or should be a scalable practice, but how it fits with the mission, operating model, and the context of our local partners. Some of them may build viable income generation activities, and we heard some examples today, including social service provision, training, technical advisory services, but others may work where market logics fail or pull them away from their initial purpose. So what we try to do as a pool fund is to identify where realistic pathways actually exist, especially around modest social enterprise models and program level cost recovery. The barrier is not the lack of entrepreneurial ambition of our partners. It is often the lack of an enabling ecosystem. And we also heard about this today, including access to working capital, seed capital, regulatory flexibility, technical advisory support, market linkages, and donors willing to fund transition only short-term delivery. One useful lesson for our fund is that financing alone is not enough. We need to support organizations to diversify their revenue base responsibly by also investing into organizational model adaptation, their governance, financial management, and their overall organizational readiness. So my final point, and Rabi hinted at that, social enterprise needs to strengthen the social purpose, not hollow it out. There is a risk that NGOs are pushed into business models that generate income, but may weaken their accountability and create mission drift, as you said. So we need careful, differentiated approaches. And for us, the question is how we can create the right conditions for some consistent income streams without asking them to become something else. So maybe I can stop here and thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think this has been a consistent message throughout all the speakers. No, the mission should be driving the tools, the instruments, and even the organizational architecture. No, thank you so much. So on my side, and I'll let Elise finish. So is a lot of the problems or the warnings we attribute to this to social enterprises or even to market-driven solutions or funding can be there with grants too. I've seen under competition with less grants, I've seen NGOs also being terribly opportunistic and having mission drift to get a certain pool of money. So I think as long as we go back again to exactly what Wolfgang was saying, what is the problem, what are the real needs, and coming from those that actually need it, not from what is in our head of how we design it. If that is the still, then we have a pool or a toolbox. Well, I know Patrick knows I hate the toolbox word, but really that of instruments, lenses, partners, ways of working in order to serve that impact. And I think that's part of the discussion. And as a person coming from a university, for me, the key part is to enable that learning. This sector has a long tradition. All of these things are not new, even though some of these instruments we call innovative, where we can learn from each other. And the scarcity mindset of competition will hurt us all. So I think it is really time for collaboration and learning, and whoever you are there, that count me in as a partner.